Secretary of State Mike Pompeo took China to task today, criticizing the totalitarian regime for censoring the history of the massacre, surveilling its 1.4 billion citizens, and denying human rights to millions. So how should America deal with such an oppressive regime? And how can we stop the U.S. from becoming a surveillance state here? Joining me now, former CIA officer and radio host Buck Sexton. Welcome back, Buck.
Hey, Kennedy.
How bad is China?
I just got back from China and had to pay attention to the fact that it is a authoritarian surveillance state. So, when you go in there, especially if you work in media, you have to be very cognizant of your electronic devices. You assume there's some degree of monitoring, but it's often really under the surface. It's operating in the digital world, and they've gotten really good at it. And in fact, what you're seeing is the Chinese government has had so much prosperity. I mean, the economy has expanded from around 1980, let's say it was, I think, 70 billion, and now we're looking at an economy that's over 7 trillion as of a few years ago. It's probably even bigger than that now. So the economic expansion, the prosperity, you see fancy cars in the streets of Beijing. I was in Shanghai as well. There's all this money there, but you also have an all-out police state, as you were mentioning in your monologue. You have a system now that is assessing loyalty to the state based on dating apps, based on social media
and
interactions.
They have something called a social credit score.
Yes.
And if you violate the norms, sometimes unspoken, they'll keep you from moving throughout the country and certainly out of the country. So they will deny millions of people the ability to access high-speed rail and airlines based on a low social score. And that's for things like smoking in non-smoking areas and looking things up on the internet that you shouldn't be looking up. And, if you are a friend of the totalitarian state and you don't violate any of those and don't exhibit any free expression at all whatsoever, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, China's created a new model. I mean, I know I'm probably, just like you, Kennedy, I'm assuming you watched Chernobyl, and it's a fantastic expose of the mentality of the Soviet Union and just the overall dysfunction. Well, there's still a totalitarian mindset in China, but instead of it being entirely dysfunctional and the bread lines and nothing works and everything breaks, in China, they're actually making things go really fast, building things really tall, and making people a whole lot richer than they were in the past. And that buys you a lot of social currency. And, one thing that kept coming.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because, I talked about in 1989 when Boris Yeltsin came over and went to a grocery store in Texas, he was moved to tears because he couldn't believe that people had these choices. He was like, even in the Politburo, they don't have these kind of choices. But in China, you do. You have technology, and they have asked, what is the price of freedom? And the answer is great, neat new stuff.
Yes, and this is where the counter narrative from our side is quite honestly not as effective and developed. With the Soviet Union, I mean, they were trying to cover it up. They were the Central Committee didn't want embarrassment, and that was the case for the entirety of the Soviet history. But we could look at them and say, this is ridiculous. They've got famines, they've got oppression, they've got mass murder, they've got all these things happening in China. What we have to figure out is how do we convince the hundreds of millions of people who have been moved out of dire poverty into something approximating a kind of Chinese middle class, oh, your totalitarian government is terrible. They look at their grandparents, who are in many cases subsistence farmers, and then they look at their parents and they look at the current generation. They're saying, I'm rolling around with a Fendi bag and a BMW. Why do I care about free speech? Why do I care about the social credit system? That was a common refrain. I just came back 2 weeks ago. You're hearing this from a lot of Chinese. So there also, by the way, Kennedy, is a nationalism and a sense of competing with us that has become a major focus. And when we criticize them on things like human rights, there is a sense of, but you guys know that we're going to beat you in 10, 15 years, right? We're going to exceed you. So we don't have, I know, America first, obviously. But Kennedy, we don't really have the narrative in place to offset this and wagging our finger at them about human rights.
No, we don't. And I understand that. And it's not free trade when it's state-sponsored oppression. And that's where I have an issue with China. I love freedom. I want our stuff to move over there. I want American businesses to thrive because Chinese citizens buy our great stuff and enjoy all of our great stuff. But at the same time, they cannot steal our technology. No more. Buck Sexton, thank you so much.
I have so much more. Good to see you, Kennedy.
I know. Always.
Just getting started.
We will continue.
Thank you.
I'll order the dumplings. Very good. Gluten-free, of course.